So you've wrote a beautiful intro for your trailer song, but you have no idea where to go from there. Well, let's talk about how you can fix that. Hey, what's up guys? This is Alex, and today we're going to talk about trailer music once again. Today we're going to talk about how to go from an intro to a full build-up that makes people enticed to listen to the rest of your song. So we're going to talk about how to structure your build-up and how to transition between intro and build-up efficiently so you don't get stuck as a composer. So this tutorial is going to be a continuation of another tutorial I made on this same track. It's a tutorial I made about how to write emotional and trailer intros. And if you haven't watched it, I recommend you to watch it. I'm going to link in the description of this video. You can find it there. And it's important to watch it because there are some things I'm not going to mention again that I already mentioned in that video. So I'm going to give for granted that you did watch the intro tutorial. Now, let's talk about build-ups. We're going to analyze this build-up here, and it goes something like this. This part is for the next tutorial, but for now, so that bridge and build up is the thing we're gonna analyze. As always, this video is sponsored by Evident, which is a website where you can buy courses about cinematic music, trailer music, and sound design written by composers who worked on AAA video games and movies. So if you're interested, I'm gonna leave a link in the description of this video to get those courses. But now let's get in the tutorial. I want to start by explaining how you can avoid getting stuck after writing your intro. And later I'm going to tell you about the 3 cardinal points that you need to have in your build-up to make it sound great. So, the way in which you can avoid getting stuck after writing your intro is this. I think most people do the mistake of, after writing the intro, thinking, okay, I need to write something else, I need to write a build-up, but it needs to sound similar to the intro because I already spent time composing the intro and I want to come up with new ideas. Now, that is one way in which you can go about it. All power to you if you want to do that, but I think it's a limiting way to think of how you can progress with your track, because it's like defining and defining and defining the scope of what's possible to the point that you're actually restricted. Now, I'm all about choosing the key beforehand, starting with a piano sketch to define the range of what's possible. But when you say to yourself, I want to write a build-up that sounds exactly like my intro, but more energetic, you're giving you a very narrow space as to how you can go about continuing your track. One thing you might have noticed, if you know the song, is that the intro here actually sounds different from the build-up. This is what the intro sounds like. The orchestra only. And that's quite different from this. Now, you might say, no, Alex, it's actually the same. It sounds like the same song, but that's the idea. You need to write something that sounds like it's the same song, same context. So you need to have some similarities, but everything else is best if you make it change. So what do I mean by this? What I did here is I kept, in the build-up, I kept the same key and the same mood that I have in the intro, and I kept the same instruments. I still have my pads and my strings and the brass and everything. But there's something different, or there's many different things. Because when I have to write a build-up, usually I don't ask myself, how can I make the build-up just like the intro but more energetic? I rather ask myself, what do I lack in the intro that I can add in the build-up? Now, that in trailer music is a very important question because usually trailer music has this structure: intro, build-up, climax, finale. Each one of these points needs to have or to provide a different emotions. It has different reasons to exist. As I mentioned in the intro, in the video about the writing intros, intros are usually suited to create emotion, to make people feel in the space, to make people feel, to make them empathize with what they're about to witness. So it makes sense to write mostly like chords and atmospheric stuff in the intro. It makes sense to use sustain elements it makes sense to not use energetic and rhythmic elements as much, because that destroys the atmosphere a little bit. So in the intro, I just have mostly atmospheric stuff. But I do have a bit of percussion in the end, because I want to build the energy up. But in the beginning, it's all like this. This means that in the intro, what we lack is exactly that, energy. We lack an orchestra that sounds huge, and we have a lack of power. So the 3 cardinal points of every build-up that I think every builder should have are exactly those. You need to have, first, energy. Second, you need to have an orchestra that sounds way more incisive and larger. And third, you need to make your track feel like it's really evolving, because the reason or the purpose of a build-up is to, after you make people empathize with what you're about to say, what you're about to express as a message, in the build-up, you start to express the message. You start to make the emotions build up inside of them. Because usually build-ups are used in trailers when things start to happen. And that's usually where the song needs to evoke emotions. It's usually the point where you need to evoke the main motifs of the song and everything. So let's talk about those 3 cardinal points: energy, an orchestra that sounds incisive, and a feeling of evolution in your track. How can you achieve that? Let's talk about that. So in this case, there's one thing I need to point out. If you see here, there's a bridge, this guy here. Now, the bridge is actually a longer transition between intro and build-up. That's not something you need to do all the time. Actually, I just put it here because I felt like I needed it, because the ending of the intro here felt too different compared to the beginning of my build-up. Like, if I had to remove the bridge entirely and just, do this transition, it wouldn't make sense. So that's why I used the bridge, because I felt like my build-up was too different. So I did something that was a bit in between. That is not too different from the intro and is not too different from the build-up. And what I did is I started to bring the energy in the track. So the way the intro ends is it has this percussion going on and these risers. And then the bridge comes. So in the bridge, there's new elements coming. The first thing the untrained here might notice is this color response between the strings and the bram here. Now, these brams here, this is a layer. One I designed myself. The other is from Evolution Atlantica. Now, this sort of sound is that thing there. Doesn't sound like, it sounds not that atmospheric and quiet anymore. It's quite aggressive, actually. So in the bridge, I started to bring the aggression in by using these brams. There's also like this sort of sound here that plays. It does this sort of color response between. So you have the color response between the sounds. Color response is a great way to build energy, and if you really pay attention, you might notice color responses everywhere in this track. And I did that exactly because I wanted to bring energy without being boring. Now, other than the brams, one thing you notice is that we have these strings. So these are just ostinatos. Now, I made an ostinato how to write epic staccatos or epic ostinatos tutorial that it's like 20 minutes long, where I explain syncopation and all those things. I'm not gonna explain here. But what we have is 2 layers. We have a cellos and violas doing. First, they do like low notes like this, like the G note, and then they do this that thing there. That thing there is just a response to the bram. So when the bram rests, you have this thing going on. I also layer the brams with some brass marcatos. And the idea of now using staccatos and marcatos is very powerful, because those articulations are more rhythmic than linear, so they're great in terms of the intrinsic energy they have. When you write staccato notes and you write marcato notes, it's gonna sound way more powerful than sustained notes will do. You know. So we have a bit of color response, we have a bit of like staccatos and whatever, and we have arpeggios doing the same thing as the strings. What else do we have? I think that's it. We don't have we also have the percussion being bigger now. So after we have this sort of build up the percussion, in the bridge the percussion sounds like this. Now the percussion, as you notice, this bum 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 is a rhythm that goes through the whole track. But there's a thing I do to make it less boring. On each repetition, there's sort of like a fill here. I'm gonna isolate the percussion here. Like bum bum brah. That thing there really helps. If you put it, after on each repetition and stuff like that, each so and so bars, that's really useful. And the percussion is also multi-layered. It's not only one percussive pattern. It's like this Armageddon ensemble, some damage. Then we have this epic toms and epic dolls from Dio, which are doing the same thing, but it's like layered. So I get a bigger sound. And then lastly, I added this layer of percussion, which is like underscore futuristic. And all of that together sounds like this. Very big. But the thing that defines this percussive pattern the most is the fact that now we have trailer hits. So these guys. Now I have a video that explains how to get huge trailer hits by layering, which is what I did here. Look for it on my YouTube tutorial channel. But these are, one is a custom trailer hit, the other is from Eva Instinct, this is from Jaeger, no, this is from Leviathan, I think. No, this is from, Leviathan, from Black Octopus, and this is from Sins from the Multiverse. Altogether, they sound like this. Now, trailer hits are very important in trailer music. You need to use them as accents for the percussion on the parts or the parts of your percussive riff that you want to accentuate. You need to have that punch on top of the percussion, So there's two layers really. There's the percussion and the trailer hits. The trailer hits are soaring on top of everything. And if you watch trailers of movies, and this is very important by the way, it sounds like it's super detailed, but this is what makes it possible for you to get trailer placements. If you don't use trailer hits in a song, if you don't have punch, if you don't have accents in your song, usually it makes it way more difficult to use the song in a trailer. So you decrease your chances of getting placements. Now, if you check out the trailer of any film, you're gonna notice that the track complements the trailer. For example, maybe a guy gets punched in the face in the trailer, and when that punch lands on the face of the guy, you might hear a huge trailer hit or a huge orchestral like tutti articulation, like brass, like a bam, something like that. Usually trailers follow these accents that we put in our music to synchronize the video to the music, and that creates a very beautiful effect, and it makes everything feel like it's like this huge, beautiful thing. It's hard to explain, but really one good exercise to understand this is to watch like 20 trailers in a row and notice all the similarities. You're gonna notice how much they use trailer hits and accents. So that's why I'm using trailer hits. Also, the trailer hits and the percussion, they complement the bram. So when the trailer hits land, it's also the bram that goes something like that. It's not the bram alone. It's like trailer hit plus bram plus big percussion plus something else. Now, the orchestration in this case is very minimal though. Like if we remove the percussion and we remove the trailer hits, it's just a color response between the brass and the strings. And again, you have no idea how to write string ostinati, I highly recommend you to check out the tutorial I mentioned. Now, what I did here, which is very important, now we talked about how to bring power, and you do that by using like short articulations, staccato, marcato. You do that by using aggressive sound design. You do that by using, layered percussion and using trader hits. That already makes your track feel like more powerful because you have rhythmic stuff going on. The trader hits also follow, like they also make it possible for you to tackle the second point, which is enlarging the size of your instrumentation or your orchestra. Trader hits make your track sound huge. Also, layering your percussion makes your track sound huge, as I mentioned in the percussion tutorial. And lastly, the last point is to make the track feel like it's evolving. I did a bit of that here. Now that's very subtle, but if you check out what's going on in the strings, for example, you have this, I place that thing again, and it does it again, but on this last repetition, this that is like, okay, this is new, like this means something is changing, you know? Well, if I kept that same thing for 4 times without ending it on a variation, that wouldn't have been as evolving. So I have a variation here in the strings. I think I have a variation in the brass as well, probably. Or not a variation, but I have this actually. This, nah, it was never there before. So it's like, it sounds like it's the beginning of something. And another thing I have in the percussion is some fills here. So I'm doing pam 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 pam. I do pam 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 at the end. That variation there tells me something is changing. Again, stupid detail, but when you add it to the details of the strings and the brass, it starts to be substantial. Now, other than that, another very important thing we have to make the track feel like it's evolving, even just in the bridge, is this. We have this riser underneath. And it keeps on getting bigger. So using risers is very important. If I remove this and I remove the variations, the leap from bridge to build up would feel weird because it wouldn't feel that something is changing. So you always need to make sure to add as many details that cue to the listener, hey, something's gonna happen now. And what I did also in this riser is that we have these stutters, which is a very beautiful way to make, to bring a bit of change, make people feel like something is happening, like energy and stuff. Another thing, we have this volume automation, which if I remove it, it's still good, but with this, you have more movement, like da 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 da. It sounds more interesting to me that way. And then when you put that together with the percussion, you have this rhythmic riser that plays with the percussion. Everything is just way more beautiful and way more powerful, in my opinion. So that's what I did. And yeah, here I also have some stutters in the Bram, and in the Brahms I also have these reverse Brahms. So it's just about having details. Now, let's talk about one thing. One thing you might have noticed is that the bridge completely lacks of atmosphere. So that's why the bridge feels like, it feels interesting because here it's all about atmosphere. Here we removed all the pads. We don't have atmospheric elements anymore except for this piano. And that's the thing that links the build-up, the bridge kind of to the intro, and same key and everything. But this is just, what I'm doing here is I'm not bringing any melodic motifs to the table. It's just na 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 na. So it's just to bring energy without defining the face of the build-up. Defining the face, i.e., bringing the melody, is something I do here. This is the melody. Ba, 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 the one you heard before. So I'm doing that in the build-up. After that, after I played enough seconds of bridge to make people used to the idea that the track is now getting powerful and bigger, now I present to them the build-up. And I linked it, as I showed you before, with the string variation, the percussion fill, the riser, and everything. Now it's time to begin the build-up. Okay, the build-up is the moment when you start defining the main phase of the song, right? The motifs, the main melodies, and you put down the things that then you can also recycle and use in the climax at the maximum potential. So there's like, you need to bring the energy, but you also need to hold back a little bit because the climax needs to sound bigger. You want to avoid finding yourself in a situation where your build-up sounds absolutely insane, top-notch energy, and now you have no idea where to go with the climax because more energy than that will be like noise and chaos. Doesn't sound good. So you want to have a build-up that sounds energetic, but still doesn't sound wild or doesn't sound fully developed. It needs to create tension and make the track, it needs to sound like it's as if the track is growing, but not as if the track has grown to its maximum potential. Now, this is where the explanation is going to get weird, I think. Because again, I'm going to explain you about how I wrote this build-up specifically. Now, this is not the only way to write build-ups. It's just the way I wrote this one specifically. But I'm going to point to the things I did, so maybe I can hopefully inspire you when you write your own build-ups. But remember, the 3 points are this: bringing energy or power. Second point, making your orchestra or your instrumentation feel way more large. And third, making your track feel like it's evolving. Let's see what I did in this build-up, starting from what people notice the most to the little details that maybe escape you. So the thing you notice here is this. There are two instrument families that stand out: the strings and the brass, but there's way more than that. Let's check out the brass. So the brass probably is the first one you notice because it's the one that gets introduced the first, like here. Like you hear it from the end of the bridge, that something is coming in the brass. And in fact, the main melody of the build-up is played on the brass. Now let's check what's going on exactly in the brass. I'm gonna dissect everything. So we have bass trombones, tubas, and a few layers of French horns. Basically, the bass trombones and tubas are just playing mostly the bass notes. This is something I referred to, or I explained in my video, use these instruments to make your track sound huge. And that video is about orchestrating bass, which is a bit of what I did here. These guys here are just, so for example, the tubas, they're just, giving the low end, the foundation. They have a very low timbre, so I would never use, like, when your instrument has a low timbre, usually it sounds a bit like dirty, I would say. That's not the right term, but it has a lot of harmonics into it. So when you play chords with tubas, it sounds like crap compared by playing chords with violins, because the violins have a much higher timbre, which makes it way more precise. Tubas are all over the place. So they're great for, one note low end kind of, or you can play high notes on the tuba, but mostly I prefer to use them for low stuff. So I use them for the bass notes, bass lines and stuff. The trombones are a bit like tubas, but they are a bit brighter and a bit less dirty. So when you go on high notes, you can get away with harmonizing a bit. So what I'm doing in the trombones is I'm playing the low notes like the tuba, like the same notes in the tuba, brought one octave higher, because the tubas are super low. I think they're the lowest brass instrument. The bass trombone are a bit higher, so I can play octave 3 with the bass trombone. And I also play this note here on top to harmonize. So the bass trombone sounds like this. That's the idea, harmonizing the bass notes. And then we have the French horn. Now, the French horn are 3 layers. Now, don't ask me how I count my instruments. I don't think it's good to use 3 layers of French horn, especially if it's 6, 6, and 6. That's a weird size, but I don't think about size when I compose. I'm not sure if that's a good thing, but I don't do it. Now, there's 1 layer of French horn which is doing the same thing as the bass trombone. So when played together with the rest, this is just the foundation, and these are marcato notes, by the way. So playing some sustains or marcatos on bass trombone on low notes, that is partly of what gives you the epic trailer sound, usually, if we're talking about orchestration. So other than that, we have these layers. So there is 1, that is playing a ba 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 ba, and there's another ba 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 ba. So it's like one leading melody and one counter melody. Now, if you're oblivious how to write melodies and how to write counter melodies for those melodies, I have a tutorial called How to Write Great Melodies and Counter Melodies by Ear, which can help you. But that's what's happening here in the brass. Now, I want to show you one thing. So if you listen to the whole melody, you notice something important. Is the repetition of the melody. So, on the repetition, I'm not doing ba 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 ba, but I'm doing ba 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 ba. That feels that it's like it's going super high, like in terms of the notes I'm using. And the higher you go in notes with your melody, the more tension you're going to create, especially if it didn't go so high before. So a beautiful way, like the build-up, again, one of the purposes of it build-up is to make the track feel like it's evolving. One way in which you can make your track feel like it's evolving is by using melodies that go high, especially if they go high after one repetition. It's not a coincidence that I end the build-up on this note. Because this feels unresolved. This feels like something is about to happen. There's tension here. This is not a release note. This is like a note that is like, bring it higher. Like okay, you know it's not where it's gonna end. And that's the ideal. Like, try to write melodies for your build-up that end on high notes. Now, in this case, the climax is linked straight to the build-up without any breaks in between, any like transitions or any cut points. This is not something you need to do all the time. I just did it because it felt way more natural for me in the way I linked my melody here with the rest. But usually you can also have a break. And even if you have a break, it's beautiful if you do a break on a tense note like this. No, no, zoom, something like that. Because it makes the track feel unresolved. Now you need to do it in a way that also sounds good and okay. But build-ups, it's great to finish them on a tense note, on a whatever, but by creating tension. And one good way in which you can create tension is by using melodies that go high. That's what I wanted to say. So that's what the brass is doing. So melody, counter melody, and basic chords, not too much like triads or four note chords, but like 2-note chords in the bass trombone and tubas to just give a bit of like body to the whole thing. Now, other than that, the other thing people notice is, of course, the string ostinato. Let's check out the string ostinato. So this guy is actually violins, violas, and cellos, and we also have a string ensemble playing some chords here. Now, I'm not going to talk about... Oh, by the way, if you want to learn more about how to write for brass, I have a tutorial about that called How to Write, I think, Epic Brass Basics. That's what it's called. For this sort of thing instead, like ostinatos, this is something that people struggle with a lot. The ostinatos people write in the beginning often sound boring and cheap and small. So I have a tutorial called How to Write Epic Staccato or something like that that explains you how to write ostinatos. They sound amazing. So I'm not going to go super in depth about, whatever, like syncopation and, how to write beautiful ostinatos, but let's analyze that a little bit. So, as I mentioned before, much of the bridge and build-up is color response. This ostinato, in some way, is meant to be a color response with the brass. In some way, because it's a bit forced. The ostinato is playing, for the most part, along the brass, The brass melody, the beautiful thing about it is that it has some rests. It's not like ba 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 ba, but it's like ba 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 rest, ba 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 rest. So in those rests, that's where I bring out the strings by boosting their volume a little bit. But these strings are playing all the time, except for the cellos. The cellos are doing a color response with the brass. If you check them out now. So the cellos in this case, I'm using them to bring the low end. like the accent, bum, ba-bum, ba-bum, and then you have this bum, 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 bum going on here. This is just the bass note that I have here in the accents, playing 1 octave higher. I put that there to bring the cellos out in the moments where the brass rests. So that's the idea. So that's the corner response here. But the violas and violins are not like following the brass at all. They're doing their own thing. So the cello is doing this again, bringing the low end, and then the accents here. And a good practice for when you write for ostinatos is to not write dun dun dun, but to do dun 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 dun, something like that. You know, that feels way more rhythmic. The violas instead are doing this. And there's so much that you can do by playing with velocities with your ostinato strings. Another thing is that you shouldn't shy away from having variations, as you see here. Bum, 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 then here. Bum, 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 bum. So don't be afraid of trying to have variations, try to build little melodies inside your ostinatos. That's something else I think I did here with the violins. The violins here are, this ostinato here is like actually bringing a motif to the table, and it sounds like this. So one thing you notice is that this ostinato is not a repetitive thing like this. But it changes every time. Now, the reason why I wanted this to change is that that's how I write my ostinatos. Like I try to, even in my ostinatos, even in my staccatos and everything, try to have some melodic aspect to it. Something that feels like the ostinato is singing to me. It's not like it's this arpeggio that keeps on playing at like for infinity, same velocity, same intensity. No, I keep it changing. And one good way in which you can make it change, keep it changing, is to change even just one note on each repetition, which is what I did here. Here it ends on a G4, here it ends on an A4, here it does this sort of thing, and here on this repetition it does that. That's a beautiful way to bring to this part, which is different, I think, from this part. So a good practice is to change even just one note, but do it in a way that makes your ostinato sound interesting. Now, that's not something you need to do in every song, but I think this ostinato sounds beautiful because of that, because it keeps on changing. And it plays on top of the rest of the ostinatos you just heard. Another beautiful thing that this ostinato does is this. So if you check the end here, by the way, yeah, I'm going to show you something else later, but if you check the end, this, sorry. That thing there. This is one of my favorite things I've wrote in this song, this passage. It makes you feel like, okay, something is changing. And you feel that in the strings, and you also feel that in the brass, because as I showed you, the melody goes higher. So together, it's just, there's a buildup of energy. This is like making the track feel like it's evolving. So you can use ostinatos in beautiful ways, also by having these sort of feels on each repetition, This ostinato, like when I say repetition, I say this. This ostinato was this long. I made it twice as long. Here, since I had this repetition, I did this thing. And here, since I have the end of the build-up, I did this to build the tension up. So that's a beautiful way in which you can use your ostinatos. And also, as you noticed, the violins ostinato are doing one thing, the violas ostinato is doing another thing, like harmonizing, and the cellos are doing another thing, So that's a beautiful way to write ostinatos. Don't do, I don't know, C major arpeggio, but do things that develop in top of each other. They chain up in terms of rhythm, they chain up in terms of accents, but they do different things. That's a good way to write ostinatos. Other than that, we also have a string sustain. This is a sustain. The rest of the song, the elements we just checked out so far, are all either marcatos or staccatos or spiccatos, because when you want to bring power to your track, using short articulations is better than using the sustained articulation, because sustained articulations feel linear, they feel emotional, they feel like pads, while rhythmic articulations sound more percussive and more incisive. That's what I meant when I said make the track feel more energetic and make it have more rhythm. But other than that, I also have like this string ensemble, which starts small and then it gets bigger. Starts with 2 note chords, sorry, and then 3, and then 4, because it goes high and high like the brass. And as you notice, I'm playing like chords mostly, and on top of that, I have this melody which is trying to simulate the brass, but it's not following it like to the T, to a T. It's doing its own movements here. So that's a beautiful thing. You can have multiple instruments go in the same direction, but then have slight difference in the way they get there. That's a beautiful way to do, a beautiful thing to do in your orchestration. Then we also have this going on. Just an arpeggio following the strings. There is this low arpeggio following the cello and the viola. Now, what I'm doing here with the arpeggio, to make it sound like it's evolving and make it sound more impactful and everything, I have some distortion that is getting triggered and grows in this bit. And then it closes down. And then it grows again. So one beautiful way in which you can make your electronic instruments sound developed, or to make them sound interesting, is to do automations on them. Trigger automation changes on their effects, stuff like that. And it's gonna make them feel like they're changing over time. And that's beautiful. So I also have another arpeggio here, which on the second repetition of the build-up introduces a new arpeggio, like a new layer. Which ends like the strings. Just like the strings. Now, this idea of introducing elements in the second repetition is very beautiful, because you have a build-up and you repeat it one more time. Then unless you change the melody, here I did change the melody, so it doesn't sound boring in its own right because the melody is different. But to make the build-up sound even more interesting on this second repetition, I added that slight detail there. And I think I also added something in the pads. So the pads do something like this. You have some, like, these pads here, which are playing this chord progression. What changed here is that while here the pads were linear, here they're a bit stuttered because I did this volume automation. So that's a beautiful way to make pads sound more rhythmic, more energetic by stuttering them. It makes them sound a bit more, rhythmic, and just make them sound, more energetic by the same token. Other than the fact that I have these pads that go high and whatever, in the second repetition I added this space organ, which is just, organ that is both playing like chords and one that is playing the ostinato that we have on the strings. So as you might notice, it's not like I'm doing, like I have a big orchestra, but it's not like I'm making like everything play something different. There's some ideas that I'm replicating or translating to another instrument, like how I'm playing the main melody from the French horn on the string ensemble as well, or how I'm playing the string ostinato on arpeggios and space organ or whatever. But it's not about making, like, letting instruments play so many things at the same time, but it's more about playing the same things on different instruments, layering the scope of a specific arpeggio or a specific melody or a specific something, to the point that that idea is proposed in so many octaves and so many timbres that you really feel it. So it's writing simple music in a way that is big, layered, and well-defined. That's how you get like the trader sound. People think that getting the trader sound is all about like putting mass everywhere, letting like instruments play 4 melodies together. It's not like that. It's like having a simple arrangement, but written in a way that is very badass. Now, other than that, we have some piano playing, I think, chords and melodies. And guess what? This is the same melody that we heard on the brass. I think. Just played with a bit of a different rhythm. Because it's piano, I thought make it a bit different. That piano has a crap load of reverb on it. It's a Valhalla shimmer, and that's how I got most of like the atmospheric textures and character of the track in this in this track. So that's the instrumentation. Below that, we also have percussion, which are following the same ideas that they followed in the bridge, like having accents with trailer hits and having like variations and fills on each repetition. Or this. That thing, the pam 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 pam, and then you also have the risers that just make it clear something is changing. So when you hear the whole track at the end of the build-up, it sounds like this. And then you have the French horn going high, and then you have the risers, and then you have the percussion doing the fill, and then you also have my vocals coming in for the climax. This is na na. That introduces the main melody that we're gonna have in the climax. Which, by the way, again, you might think, well, now that I have my build-up laid down, I can just take the build-up and just make it more intense in the climax. That's not what I did. It's partly what I did because in the climax, I have the same chord progression, same instrument, same mood, but I actually introduced something new. I introduced my vocals, which are playing a different melody, and I also changed the ostinatos I have in my strings. So we're gonna see that in the next tutorial. But for now, this is how I wrote the build-up of this track. These are the ideas I followed. And again, it's all about making the track feel like it's evolving. So use risers, use melodies that end on a high note, have variations in your string ostinatos, have variation in your percussion. And the second point is enlarging the size or the scope of your orchestra instrumentation. Use aggressive sound design, use big percussion, layer your percussion, use trailer hits, especially layer them if they sound too little compared to the rest of the orchestra. Use short articulations like marcatos, spiccatos, layer your spiccatos, layer your marcatos, use marcatos on brass, use bass trombone, use cellos, use the low end of your track, like the low end instruments, as I mentioned in the tutorial about bass. And if you have atmospheric elements, that's not a bad thing, but try to stutter them, try to make them a bit more rhythmic. And lastly, bring energy and power. Yeah, and you do that by using rhythmic stuff and percussion. So that's it for this tutorial. I hope it helped you out. And if you want to analyze this whole track on your own, I have the stems of this track up on Patreon. If you support me there, you can download the stems of this song, every single one of the songs that I published here on YouTube in the past. And lastly, again, if you want to learn more in a well-structured course made by AAA video game and trader composers, I highly recommend you to check out the Evident courses, which is also a great way to give back to this channel, because when you buy a course from those links on my description, you give me a huge helping hand. And yeah, that's it for this video. If you're new here, subscribe. I must have like 50 or 100 videos about orchestral music, cinematic music, and all that good stuff. Leave me a comment if you have a question. Leave me a comment if you feel like this was a great video. Share it with a friend, and that is all. I'll see you in the next episode about how to write a trader climax. Goodbye.